Get that cleaning lady out of my range. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reeves's voice exploded across Whiskey Jack Range like thunder. His face was purple with rage, spittle flying as he jabbed a finger at the small woman kneeling by the target markers. I don't care if you're scrubbing toilets or picking up trash. This is a restricted military zone. Bang, bang, bang. 3 more shots missed the target at 700 yards. Shot number 125, 126, 127. Each miss brought his Force Recon team closer to mission failure and career destruction. Sabrina Williams slowly stood up, dust on her faded maintenance uniform, thermos in one weathered hand. She was maybe one. She's sa très manner, probably 59 kilograms, soaking wet. The kind of woman you would pass on the street without a second glance. Sir, I just noticed your wind flags are lying to you, she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the mountain breeze. The entire firing line went dead silent. 6 elite Marine snipers turned to stare. This little janitor was lecturing them about marksmanship. The thermal layer at 900 yards is flowing opposite direction. Your ballistic computer can't see it. But watch the grass shimmer. You're aiming for yesterday's wind. Reeves stepped closer, invading her space, using his 188 Menor frame to intimidate. Lady, I've been shooting targets since before you learned to walk. Take your folk wisdom and get the heck off my range. Sabrina didn't move, didn't blink. Something shifted in her pale green eyes. Something cold, something dangerous. What if I told you I could hit all 3 targets with 1 shot? The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. If watching impossible military feats blow your mind, hit that subscribe button right now and smash the notification bell. Epic military stories drop weekly, and this is just getting started. The morning sun blazed down on the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, casting long shadows across the high-altitude range. At 2590 m elevation, the air was thin, the wind unpredictable, and the pressure crushing. This wasn't just another training exercise. This was the final qualification for deployment to Syria, where precision shots meant the difference between mission success and body bags coming home. Staff Sergeant Elena Torres lowered her spotting scope. Frustration etched across her weathered face. Gunny. The computer says the wind is steady at 24 kilometers from the northwest, but these shots are drifting like we're in a hurricane. Corporal James Williams wiped sweat from his brow, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his rifle scope. My ballistic solution should be perfect. Range verified at 700 yards. Barometric pressure accounted for. Even calculated for the Coriolis effect. I don't understand why nothing's hitting me. Sergeant Davis, the unit's best marksman until this morning, stared at his high-tech equipment in disbelief. The Barrett M82 rifle before him was worth more than most people's cars. The Schmidt and Bender scope alone cost 16,500 euro. The ballistic computer strapped to his wrist could calculate firing solutions faster than most people could think. Yet target after target remained untouched. This is absolutely ridiculous, Reeves barked, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in the Corps. We've got the best equipment, the best training, the best Marines in the world, and we can't hit a stationary target. What's command going to say when they find out Force Recon couldn't qualify for deployment? Behind the safety barrier, Sabrina continued her maintenance work, deadheading the roses planted along the range perimeter. To any casual observer, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a civilian contractor hired to keep the base grounds presentable. Her khaki uniform was faded from countless washings, her steel-toed boots scuffed from years of honest work. The name tape on her chest read simply S. Williams in block letters. But her positioning wasn't random. From her vantage point, she could see every wind flag along the range, from the closest at 400 yards to the furthest at 700 yards. More importantly, she could see what the Marines couldn't, the way the mountain terrain created invisible air currents that no computer could predict. Rangemaster Thompson, a grizzled master sergeant with 28 years of service, approached the firing line with a clipboard thick with documentation. Gentlemen, I need to remind you that this qualification cannot be postponed. The deployment schedule is non-negotiable. If this team fails to qualify, replacement Marines will be selected from 2nd Battalion. The threat hung heavy in the desert air. 2nd Battalion was good, but they weren't force recon. They weren't the elite of the elite. For these 6 Marines, failure here meant not just professional embarrassment, but the end of everything they had worked toward. Sabrina stood slowly, her movements deliberate and careful. She walked toward the range office ostensibly to check the maintenance schedule posted on the bulletin board. But her path took her close enough to the firing line to hear the technical discussions. The Mirage is running left to right at 1,000 yards. Torres was saying, but the flags at 1,500 are showing completely different wind direction. Computer says to hold 2, 3 minutes left. Williams added, but every shot is going 4 minutes right of center. Sabrina paused, pretending to read her work schedule while listening to the Marine's frustrated analysis. She'd heard enough. Excuse me, she said quietly, approaching the barrier. I don't mean to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Reeves spun around, his face immediately darkening. Ma'am, this is a restricted training area. Civilians need to maintain a safe distance from active firing operations. I understand. Gunny, Sabrina replied, using the familiar term with natural ease. I just thought you might want to know that your wind readings are being affected by thermal inversion. The silence that followed was deafening. Torres and Williams exchanged glances. Davis actually lowered his rifle to stare at the maintenance worker, who just used a term most civilians had never heard. Thermal inversion, Thompson repeated, walking closer to the barrier. Ma'am, what exactly do you know about long-range ballistics? Sabrina shrugged, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed both humility and confidence. I just noticed things. The flags at 800 yards are showing one wind pattern, but if you look at the grass on that ridge at 1,000 yards, it's bending the opposite direction. The hot air rising from those rocks is creating a rolling current that reverses direction about every 45 seconds. Reeves felt his professional pride stinging. This woman, this janitor, was lecturing him about marksmanship in front of his Marines. Listen, lady, I appreciate your observations, but we have actual scientific equipment here. We don't need folk wisdom about grass bending. Your equipment is reading surface wind. Sabrina continued calmly, but bullets fly through 3 dimensions. At this altitude, with this terrain, you've got at least 3 distinct wind layers between here and that target. Williams lowered his scope and actually looked where Sabrina was pointing. For the first time all morning, he began to see what she was describing. The flags told one story, but the natural indicators, grass, dust, heat shimmer, were telling another. Holy cow, Williams whispered. She's right. Look at the mirage patterns. They're flowing in completely different directions at different distances. Torres raised her spotting scope following Sabrina's guidance. The thermal layer is definitely moving opposite to the surface wind. How did we miss that? Because you're looking at data instead of reading the environment, Sabrina replied. Your computers can calculate theoretical ballistics, but they can't feel the mountain breathing. Reeves felt control of the situation slipping away. This civilian was making his Marines question their training, their equipment, their methods. Worse, she might actually be right. Ma'am, I need to ask you to step back from the firing line. Thompson interjected, though his tone was more curious than dismissive. Do you have any formal training in ballistics or meteorology? Sabrina smiled a small, enigmatic smile. I've picked up a few things over the years. As she spoke, she unconsciously shifted her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight slightly forward, hands clasped behind her back. It was a position any military person would recognize instantly. Parade rest. The posture was so natural, so automatic that she didn't even realize she'd assumed it. But Williams noticed. Sargi, he whispered to Torres. Look at how she's standing. Torres followed his gaze and felt a chill run down her spine. That wasn't the posture of a civilian contractor. That was military bearing, ingrained through years of training and discipline. Ma'am, Thompson said slowly, might I ask where you learned about wind reading and ballistics? Books mostly, Sabrina replied, though something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. I've always been interested in precision shooting. It's a fascinating science, She turned to look at the target through a pair of compact binoculars that hung around her neck. The movement revealed a glimpse of her forearm, where the edge of what looked like a scar disappeared beneath her long sleeves. Your biggest problem right now is that you're fighting the wind instead of working with it, she continued. Those thermal currents I mentioned, they're predictable, every 40 to 50 seconds. The hot air cycle completes, and you get about a 3-second window where the wind layers align. Davis lowered his rifle completely now, his full attention on this mysterious woman. You're saying we need to time our shots? I'm saying you need to stop trusting your computers and start trusting your eyes. Sabrina replied, watch the mirage. Really watch it. See how it pulses. That's your countdown timer. Reeves had heard enough. This entire conversation was undermining his authority and making his team question everything that she had been taught. Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist that you return to your duties and allow my Marines to complete their training without interference. Of course. Gunny, Sabrina said, stepping back from the barrier. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. But as she walked away, Torres called after her. Wait a minute. You said you could hit all 3 targets with 1 shot. What did you mean by that? Sabrina paused, turning back with that enigmatic smile. Ricochet ballistics. If you understand the angles and the target materials, one properly placed shot can create a chain reaction. The Marines stared at her in stunned silence. Ricochet ballistics was an advanced military science studied by special operations units and classified research programs. It wasn't something you learned from books. Ma'am, Thompson said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. I think we need to continue this conversation. Would you mind if I asked to see some identification? For just a moment, something flickered across Sabrina's features. Not fear, but calculation, like a chess player suddenly realizing the game had changed. Of course, she replied, reaching into her pocket and producing a standard contractor ID badge. Sabrina Williams, GS7 maintenance specialist. I've been working on base for about 18 months. Thompson examined the ID carefully. It looked legitimate, complete with digital photo and security clearance indicators. But something about the whole situation felt off. 18 months, he repeated. And in that time, you've developed expertise in advanced ballistics. I'm a fast learner, Sabrina replied with a shrug. Meanwhile, Williams had been thinking about what she'd said regarding wind patterns. Against Reeves's obvious disapproval, he adjusted his scope and began timing the thermal cycles she'd described. After watching for 2 minutes, he could see the pattern she'd identified. Gunny, he said quietly. I think she's right about the wind cycles. I can see the pattern now. Corporal Williams, Reeves snapped. You will not adjust your firing solution based on advice from a civilian contractor. But Torres had also been watching, and she was seeing the same thing Williams had observed. Sargi. The mirage pattern definitely cycles every 48 seconds, and there's definitely a brief moment where the layers align. Sabrina watched the exchange with growing interest. These were good Marines. Talented marksmen who'd simply been let down by over-reliance on technology. With proper guidance, they could easily make these shots. Tell you what, she said, her voice taking on a slightly different quality. Give me 1 shot at your target and I'll prove what I'm talking about. Reeves laughed, but it was a harsh sound without humor. Ma'am, this is a military weapons range. We can't just hand rifles to civilians. I have a hunting rifle in my truck, Sabrina replied calmly. Nothing fancy, just something I use for deer hunting. But I bet I can demonstrate the principles I've been describing. This is getting ridiculous, Reeves muttered. But Thompson held up a hand. Actually, Gunny, I'm curious to see what she has in mind. Ma'am, what kind of hunting rifle are we talking about? Nothing special, Sabrina repeated. Just an old Remington 700. But it's accurate. And more importantly, I know exactly how it shoots. Thompson considered this. Technically, there was no regulation preventing a contractor from demonstrating civilian marksmanship skills, especially if it might help solve their current training problem. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. 1 shot at your target. Sabrina said simply, if I miss, I'll apologize for wasting your time and get back to my gardening. If I hit, maybe you'll consider that there might be something to what I've been saying about wind reading. The audacity of the proposal was staggering. A civilian contractor was challenging Force Recon Marines to a shooting contest using a hunting rifle against military-grade precision weapons. It should have been laughable. But something in Sabrina's quiet confidence suggested this wasn't a joke. "Ma'am," Davis interjected, "that target is at 700 yards. That's over a mile. Most hunting rifles aren't even capable of that range." "Most aren't," Sabrina agreed. "But mine's been modified a bit." Thompson and Reeves exchanged glances. The situation had moved far beyond normal training protocols, but the potential learning opportunity was too valuable to dismiss. "All right," Thompson said finally, "but we do this properly. Safety protocols will be strictly observed. You'll need to provide proof that your weapon is properly registered and that you're qualified to operate it on a military range." "Of course," Sabrina nodded. "Give me just a minute to get everything from my truck." As she walked toward the parking area, the Marines watched in fascination and disbelief. Williams shook his head slowly. "This is either going to be the most impressive thing we've ever seen or the most embarrassing." "My money's on embarrassing," Reeves muttered, but privately, he wasn't so sure. There was something about this woman that didn't add up. Her technical knowledge, her military bearing, her quiet confidence. It all pointed to experience far beyond what any civilian contractor should possess. Torres raised her binoculars to watch Sabrina at her vehicle. "Guys, you need to see this." The maintenance truck was a standard government vehicle, but Sabrina was opening what appeared to be a custom gun case from the cargo area. Even from a distance, it was clear that whatever was inside had been carefully secured and professionally maintained. "That's not a standard hunting rifle case," Davis observed. "That's military-grade transportation equipment." Thompson felt a growing sense that this demonstration was about to become something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. "Corporal Williams, contact base security and verify that contractor's clearance status. I want to know everything about Sabrina Williams." "Yes, sir," Williams replied, pulling out his radio. But before he could make the call, Sabrina was walking back toward the firing line, carrying her rifle case and what appeared to be a small range bag. Her movements were different now, more purposeful, more precise. The casual demeanor of a maintenance worker was being replaced by something else entirely. "Ma'am," Thompson called out as she approached, "before we proceed, I need to inspect your weapon and verify that it meets range safety requirements." "Absolutely," Sabrina replied, setting the case down on a nearby bench. "Safety first." She opened the case with practiced efficiency, revealing not the typical hunting rifle the Marines had expected, but something far more sophisticated. The weapon was indeed based on a Remington 700 Action, but it had been extensively modified. The stock was custom carbon fiber, the barrel was heavy match grade, and the scope was a high-end precision optic that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Holy cow," Williams whispered. "That's not a hunting rifle. That's a precision rifle system." Thompson examined the weapon closely. Everything about it screamed professional modification. The trigger work, the bedding job, the scope mounting system. This was the kind of rifle used by serious competitive shooters or military precision marksmen. "Ma'am, this is quite an impressive weapon. Where did you acquire it?" "Built it myself," Sabrina replied matter-of-factly. "Took me about 2 years to get everything just right. It shoots sub-MOA groups at 1,000 yards, assuming the shooter does their part." Reeves felt his skepticism wavering. The rifle in front of him was clearly the product of someone with extensive knowledge of precision shooting. But that raised even more questions about who exactly Sabrina Williams really was. "All right," Thompson said finally. "Range safety rules are in effect. You'll have one shot at the target. If you achieve a hit, we'll discuss wind reading techniques. If you miss, we return to standard training protocols." Sabrina nodded, taking the rifle from Thompson and performing a quick function check with movements that were definitely not those of a casual hunter. Her inspection was systematic, professional, and completed in under 30 seconds. "Who is she?" Drop your wildest theories below. Former CIA, Special Forces, something even crazier. Before I shoot, Sabrina said, I want to make sure everyone understands what's about to happen. The target you've been trying to hit, it's positioned perfectly for a ricochet demonstration. She pointed toward the range, indicating the steel target at 700 yards. Behind that target, at roughly 200 yards further back, there's a steel plate for the 2,000 yards range. And beyond that, at the very back of the valley, there's a third steel target at 200 yards. The Marines followed her pointing, suddenly realizing the layout she was describing. The 3 targets were indeed positioned in a rough line, separated by distances that would require precise calculation to connect with a single shot. You're talking about hitting 3 targets with 1 bullet? Torres asked, her voice reflecting her disbelief. Ricochet ballistics, Sabrina confirmed. If you understand the angles and the target materials, and if you can read the wind correctly, it's theoretically possible to create a bullet path that connects multiple targets. Davis lowered his spotting scope to stare at her directly. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not theoretically possible. That's practically impossible. The physics alone. The physics are complicated but manageable. Sabrina interrupted gently. You need to account for angle of incidence, target material hardness, bullet construction, and of course, environmental factors. But it can be done. Thompson realized that this demonstration had moved far beyond simple marksmanship. If this woman could actually accomplish what she was describing, it would represent a level of skill that bordered on the supernatural. Ma'am, I need to ask you directly. What is your background? Because what you're describing requires knowledge that isn't available in civilian shooting programs. For a long moment, Sabrina didn't answer. She looked out at the targets, then back at the Marines who were watching her with growing fascination and suspicion. I've had some training, she said finally. More than most, I suppose. It was a non-answer that raised more questions than it resolved. But before Thompson could press further, Sabrina was moving toward the firing position. She set up with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no uncertainty. The rifle was positioned perfectly. Her body alignment was textbook, and her breathing pattern was controlled and steady. I need about 2 minutes to read the wind conditions, she said, settling into position behind the scope. This shot requires timing the thermal cycles we discussed earlier. The Marines watched in fascination as Sabrina began what appeared to be a meditation process. Her eyes moved constantly, tracking wind flags, grass movement, and heat mirage patterns across the entire range. She was reading the environment like a book, gathering information that her brain was processing into a firing solution more complex than any computer could calculate. Thermal inversion is completing its cycle, she murmured, more to herself than to the observers. Surface wind steady at 22 km/h from the northwest. Mid-level crosswind at approximately 13 km/h from the southwest. High-level flow minimal, maybe 3 km/h. Williams grabbed his spotting scope, trying to see what Sabrina was seeing. How can you tell all that just by looking? Practice, she replied simply. When you stop trusting machines and start trusting your eyes, you begin to see things differently. Thompson checked his watch. This entire situation had moved far beyond normal training protocols. But he couldn't bring himself to stop it. If nothing else, his Marines were learning more about environmental awareness in these 10 minutes than they had in months of computer-assisted training. A wind cycle is approaching the convergence point, Sabrina announced. 30 seconds. She adjusted her scope slightly, making minute corrections to elevation and windage that seemed to be based on calculations happening in her head. Her breathing slowed, becoming deeper and more regular. 15 seconds. The entire range had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the mountain walls. Through their spotting scopes, the Marines watched the bullet's path, marked by a slight disturbance in the air as it flew down range. 700 yards away. The first target rang with the distinctive sound of a solid hit, but instead of absorbing the bullet's energy, the steel plate deflected it at a precise angle, sending it toward the second target. Clang! 2,000 yards. Another perfect hit. Another calculated deflection. Clang! 2,200 yards. The final target sang out across the valley, confirming what should have been impossible. 3 targets, 1 shot. Perfect execution. The silence that followed was broken only by the faint echo of the last impact bouncing off the mountain walls. 6 elite Marines and 1 rangemaster stood in stunned disbelief at what they had just witnessed. "Good Lord," Thompson whispered, lowering his binoculars. That's not possible." Sabrina worked the bolt of her rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge case and engaging the safety in one fluid motion. She sat up from the firing position with the same controlled movements she'd used throughout the demonstration. "Wind reading," she said simply, as if she'd just demonstrated how to tie a shoelace. When you understand the environment, you can work with it instead of fighting against it. But the Marines weren't looking at her anymore. They were staring at something else entirely. Something that had been revealed when Sabrina's maintenance shirt had shifted during the shooting position. Underneath the faded civilian clothing, they could see the edge of what was unmistakably a tactical vest. And on that vest, partially visible, was a patch that made Thompson's blood run cold. Delta Force, the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and below that, a name tape that read simply, Williams. Thompson's mind raced as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place. The technical knowledge, the military bearing, the impossible marksmanship skill, and now physical evidence that this maintenance worker was something else entirely. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice taking on a very different tone, "I think we need to have a conversation about who you really are." But before Sabrina could respond, the distinctive sound of rotors began echoing through the mountain valley. A helicopter was approaching fast, flying low and fast in the kind of tactical profile used for emergency insertions. Williams grabbed his radio, switching to the air traffic control frequency. "Whiskey Jack range control. We have unscheduled air traffic approaching the range. Please identify." The response crackled through the speaker with the authority of high-level command. "Whiskey Jack range. This is Sword 66. Emergency priority flight with Colonel Hayes aboard. Clear the range immediately and prepare for command consultation." Thompson felt his stomach drop. Colonel Hayes was the base commander, and he didn't make emergency flights to remote training ranges unless something significant was happening. The UH-60 Blackhawk settled onto the range's helicopter landing zone in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Before the engines had even begun to wind down, figures were emerging from the aircraft. Colonel Hayes in full battle dress uniform, the base sergeant major, and behind them, 2 individuals in civilian clothes who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "What the heck is going on?" Reeves muttered. But Thompson was beginning to understand. The approaching group moved with purpose and urgency that suggested this wasn't a routine visit. They were walking directly toward the firing line, directly towards Sabrina Williams, who had quietly begun packing her rifle away with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the morning. "Agent Williams," Colonel Hayes called out while still 50 yards away. "We need to talk now. Agent Williams, not Contractor Williams, not Civilian Williams. Agent Williams." The Marines exchanged glances that reflected their growing understanding that they had stumbled into something far beyond a simple training exercise. The quiet maintenance worker, who had just demonstrated impossible marksmanship skills, was apparently a federal agent of some kind operating undercover on their base. Thompson approached Sabrina, his mind reeling with questions. "Ma'am, I think I owe you an apology. We had no idea. You weren't supposed to," Sabrina replied calmly, securing her rifle in its case. "The cover was working perfectly until your Marines started having problems with their wind reading." She turned to face the approaching command group, her entire demeanor shifting from the humble maintenance worker they had met that morning to something else entirely. Her posture straightened, her movements became more precise, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before. "Colonel Hayes, she said with a slight nod. I assume my cover's been blown. Completely, Hayes replied, stopping in front of the group. Agent Williams. Meet Gunnery Sergeant Reeves and his Force Recon team. Gentlemen, meet Special Agent Sabrina Williams. Defense Intelligence Agency, currently assigned to Operation Ghostwalker. The words hit the Marines like physical blows. Defense Intelligence Agency, Operation Ghostwalker. This wasn't just any federal agent. This was someone operating at the highest levels of military intelligence. Operation Ghostwalker, Torres repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Classified. One of the civilian agents replied curtly. What's important is that Agent Williams's cover has been compromised, which creates significant operational problems. The revelation hit the Marines like a physical blow, but Colonel Hayes wasn't finished. Gunnery Sergeant Reeves, your conduct this morning represents the most serious breach of operational security protocols I've witnessed in 25 years of service. Reeves stammered, trying to find words. Sir, we had no way of knowing. You had no way of knowing because you failed to follow basic courtesy and respect protocols with base personnel. Hayes cut him off sharply. Your aggressive treatment of someone you assumed was just a janitor demonstrates exactly the kind of prejudice and poor judgment that has no place in the modern Marine Corps. The colonel turned to address the entire group. Agent Williams's mission required months of careful positioning and trust building with base personnel. Your actions this morning have compromised 18 months of intelligence gathering and put a valuable national security asset at risk. Master Sergeant Thompson stepped forward. Sir, the team was under pressure to qualify. The team was under pressure to perform their duties professionally. Hayes replied coldly. That pressure does not excuse treating anyone, regardless of their apparent status, with disrespect and hostility. This incident will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. Hayes turned to address Thompson directly. Master Sergeant, I need to know exactly what happened here this morning. Every detail from the beginning. As Thompson began recounting the morning's events, Sabrina continued packing her equipment with practiced efficiency, but the Marines couldn't help noticing that she was also constantly scanning their surroundings, her eyes moving in patterns that suggested tactical awareness, far beyond anything a maintenance worker would possess. Sir, Williams interrupted Thompson's report. If I may ask, what exactly is Operation Ghostwalker? The question hung in the air for a moment before Hayes responded. That's classified above your clearance level. Corporal, what I can tell you is that Agent Williams has been operating undercover on this base for the past 18 months as part of a national security operation that I cannot discuss. 18 months. The time frame matched exactly with when Sabrina had supposedly been hired as a maintenance contractor. The elaborate cover story, the false identification, the careful positioning that allowed her to observe range operations. It had all been carefully planned and executed. The shooting demonstration, Reeves said slowly. That wasn't just showing off, was it? Sabrina looked up from her equipment, meeting his eyes directly. Your team has been having problems qualifying for deployment. That affects readiness, which affects mission capability. I couldn't let good Marines fail because they were overthinking their equipment instead of trusting their training. There was something in her tone that suggested personal investment in their success, not just professional duty, but genuine concern for fellow warriors. Ma'am, Davis ventured, when you said you'd had some training, exactly what kind of training were we talking about? Before Sabrina could answer, the sergeant major stepped forward with a manila folder in his hands. Agent Williams is a graduate of the Defense Intelligence Agency's Advanced Reconnaissance Course, the Army's Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, and the Navy's Special Warfare Development Group Precision Marksmanship Program. She holds expert ratings on 14 different weapon systems and has completed more than 40 operational deployments in 12 countries. The silence that followed was profound. These Marines, who considered themselves elite operators, were suddenly realizing they were in the presence of someone whose qualifications made their own training look elementary. Holy cow, Williams whispered. Ma'am, why were you working as a maintenance contractor? Cover for status, Sabrina replied simply. The mission required someone who could observe base operations without drawing attention. A civilian contractor with grounds maintenance responsibilities has access to virtually every area of the base, can be present during training exercises without suspicion, and can gather intelligence on operational readiness without anyone asking questions. Thompson was beginning to understand the scope of what they'd stumbled into. Ma'am, when you were watching our training this morning, you weren't just being helpful? You were conducting some kind of assessment, among other things. Sabrina confirmed force recon teams represent significant strategic assets. When a team begins experiencing unusual training problems, that becomes a matter of interest to certain agencies. Hayes consulted his watch, then addressed the group with obvious urgency. Agent Williams, the situation has changed. Your original mission parameters are no longer viable. We need to relocate you immediately. Understood, sir, Sabrina replied. How much time do I have? 15 minutes to gather essential materials. Transport will be standing by. The efficiency of the exchange suggested that this kind of rapid extraction was routine for people at Sabrina's level. But for the Marines watching the conversation, it was like getting a glimpse into a world they never knew existed. Sir, Torres asked hesitantly, is Agent Williams in some kind of danger? Hayes and Sabrina exchanged a look that suggested the question had touched on something significant. There are operational concerns, Hayes replied carefully. Nothing that affects base security. But Agent Williams's continued presence here is no longer advisable. It was a diplomatic way of saying that something had gone seriously wrong with whatever mission Sabrina had been conducting. But the details were far above the Marine's security clearance. Sabrina finished packing her rifle and stood, slinging the case over her shoulder with movements that were now obviously those of a professional operator rather than a civilian employee. Before I go, she said, addressing the Marines directly, let me leave you with something that might help with your qualification shoots. She walked to the range equipment locker and pulled out a piece of paper, sketching quickly with a pencil. Wind reading isn't about the equipment. It's about understanding that air moves in layers like a river with currents at different depths. Your computers can measure surface conditions, but bullets fly through three-dimensional space. The sketch showed the range profile with arrows indicating wind flow at different altitudes, thermal currents rising from heated surfaces, and pressure differentials created by terrain features. At this range in these mountains, you've got 4 distinct wind environments, she continued. Surface wind affected by ground heating, mid-level crosswinds influenced by the valley shape, high-altitude flow, usually steady but weak, and thermal inversion layers that reverse direction cyclically. Williams studied the diagram intently. How do you read all that without instruments? Grass movement for surface wind, mirage patterns for mid-level currents, dust movement for pressure differentials, and timing. Thermal cycles are predictable if you know what to look for. She handed him the sketch. Practice reading the environment instead of reading the computer. Your equipment should confirm what your eyes are telling you, not replace what your brain can calculate. Torres looked up from the diagram. Ma'am, this is graduate-level meteorology applied to ballistics. Where did you learn this? Trial and error, Sabrina replied with a slight smile. When your life depends on making impossible shots in impossible conditions, you learn to see things differently. The casual mention of life or death situations reminded the Marines that they were talking to someone whose operational experience was probably far beyond anything they could imagine. The precision shooting demonstration hadn't been a party trick. It had been a glimpse into the kind of skills required for missions they would never hear about. Hayes checked his watch again. Agent Williams, we need to move. Copy that. Sir. Sabrina turned back to the Marines one final time. Gentlemen, you're good Marines with good instincts. Trust your training, trust your eyes, and stop overthinking your equipment. You'll make those shots. She paused, then added with evident sincerity. It's been an honor working alongside you, even if you didn't know it at the time. Thompson stepped forward, extending his hand. Ma'am, it's been an honor having you here. I wish we could have known sooner. That was the point, Sabrina replied, shaking his hand firmly. But maybe it worked out for the best. Your team learned something important today, and maybe they'll remember it when it counts. As the command group prepared to leave, Reeves found himself with one burning question that he had to ask. Agent Williams, when you said you could hit 3 targets with one shot, had you ever actually done that before? Or was this morning the first time? Sabrina paused at the question, a shadow crossing her features. Gunnery Sergeant, there are some things about my operational history that I can't discuss. But I will say this. The shot I made this morning was significantly easier than some I've had to make in the field. The statement hung in the air like smoke, suggesting experiences and capabilities that existed in a realm far beyond normal human experience. Take care of yourselves, she added, then turned to follow Colonel Hayes toward the waiting helicopter. The Marines watched in silence as the group walked away, taking with them the mystery woman who had appeared in their lives for a few hours and changed everything they thought they knew about precision shooting, environmental awareness, and the hidden world of intelligence operations. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Sabrina Williams back into whatever shadows she had emerged from, the 6th Force Recon Marines stood looking at the targets she had hit with a single impossible shot. Well, Davis said finally, I guess we know why our wind reading was giving us problems. Yeah, Williams agreed, still holding the sketch she had drawn. We were trying to fight the mountain instead of understanding it. Torres picked up her rifle, chambering around and settling into firing position. All right, let's see if we can apply what we just learned. But as the Marines prepared to resume their training, each of them carried with them the knowledge that they had just encountered someone operating at a level of skill and authority that most people never even knew existed. Sabrina Williams, or whoever she really was, had given them a glimpse into a world where impossible shots were routine, where covers could be maintained for months or years, and where the difference between success and failure was measured in lives rather than scores. The wind patterns she had described were still there, still flowing in their complex three-dimensional dance across the mountain range. But now, the Marines could see them, could read them, could work with them instead of against them. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors was fading as Agent Williams disappeared back into the shadows, leaving behind only questions, a shooting lesson, and the lingering sense that they had just been part of something much larger than a simple training exercise. The impossible shot would be talked about for years to come. But the real lesson, the one about reading the environment, trusting instincts, and understanding that there was always more to learn, would shape how these Marines approached every mission for the rest of their careers. The helicopter disappeared beyond the mountain ridge, leaving behind a silence that seemed heavier than the thin mountain air. The 6th Force Recon Marines stood motionless, processing what had just happened. Their simple qualification exercise had transformed into something that would redefine everything they thought they knew about their profession. Thompson was the first to break the silence. Gentlemen, I want everyone to understand that what just occurred here is classified. Agent Williams's identity, her demonstration, and everything we witnessed falls under operational security protocols. Understood, Master Sergeant, Reeves replied, though his voice carried a note of bewilderment. But sir, what exactly do we tell command about our qualification status? It was a practical question that cut through the surreal nature of the morning's events. They still had a mission to complete, still had to prove their readiness for deployment. The impossible shot demonstration, while spectacular, hadn't actually resolved their original training problem. Torres looked down at the sketch Sabrina had left them, studying the wind flow patterns she'd drawn with quick, confident strokes. Maybe we should try applying what she taught us. Williams nodded, hefting his rifle. At this point, what do we have to lose? Traditional methods weren't working. Davis moved to the firing line, but instead of immediately settling into position, he began observing the range environment the way Sabrina had demonstrated. Grass movement, heat mirage patterns, dust drift. Indicators he'd been trained to notice, but had dismissed in favor of electronic readings. Okay, he said slowly. I can see what she meant about the thermal layers. Look at the mirage at 1,000 yards versus 1,500 yards. They're flowing in completely different directions. Thompson checked his chronometer. You have 2 hours remaining for qualification attempts. I suggest you use them wisely. Reeves felt his leadership authority slowly returning as the shock of the morning's revelations began to fade. All right, Marines. We're going to approach this systematically. Williams, you're up first. Apply Agent Williams's techniques and see what happens. Corporal Williams moved to the firing position, but his approach was different now. Instead of immediately consulting his ballistic computer, he spent several minutes simply observing wind flags, grass patterns, the mirage, the behavior of dust particles in the air. He was learning to read the environment like a language he'd never bothered to study before. Surface wind is about 22 km/h from the northwest, he announced. But the grass at 1,000 yards is bending toward us, which means there's a reversal in the mid-level flow. Torres raised her spotting scope following his analysis. Confirmed. The mirage patterns show cross-flow at different altitudes. Williams consulted Sabrina's sketch, correlating the drawn wind patterns with what he was observing in real time. According to this, I should wait for the thermal cycle to complete, then fire during the convergence window. He watched patiently, timing the thermal patterns Sabrina had described. After 90 seconds of observation, he saw what she had been talking about. A brief moment when the chaotic air current seemed to align into a more predictable flow. Firing, Williams announced, squeezing the trigger during what he calculated as the optimal wind window. The bullet's flight seemed to take forever, but when the distinctive ring of steel impact echoed across the valley, it came from exactly where it should have, dead center of the target at 1,700 yards. The silence that followed was different from the stunned quiet after Sabrina's demonstration. This was the satisfaction of Marines who had just proven they could adapt, learn, and overcome a challenge that had seemed impossible hours earlier. Outstanding, Thompson said with genuine approval. That's how it's done. Davis was already moving to the firing line, eager to test his own application of the wind reading techniques. His shot, fired after careful environmental observation, also found its mark with authority that spoke of regained confidence. One by one, each member of the team successfully engaged the target using Sabrina's environmental reading methods. The sophisticated ballistic computers remained unused, replaced by careful observation and an understanding of how mountains breathed, how air flowed in 3 dimensions, and how patience could be more valuable than technology. By noon, all 6 Marines had successfully qualified for deployment. The mission that had seemed impossible at sunrise was complete, accomplished using techniques taught by a woman whose true identity they were only beginning to comprehend. Gentlemen, Reeves announced, pack your gear. We're heading back to the company area for debrief and mission preparation. But as the Marines began securing their equipment, Torres noticed something that made her pause. Sarge, look over there by the maintenance shed. A black sedan with government plates was parked near the building where Sabrina had supposedly kept her groundskeeping equipment. 2 men in business suits were loading boxes into the vehicle's trunk. Boxes that appeared to contain more sophisticated equipment than any maintenance worker would possess. Looks like they're cleaning out her cover operation, Williams observed quietly. Thompson approached the sedan, his curiosity overriding normal protocol. The men loading equipment looked up as he approached, and one of them produced federal credentials. Master Sergeant Thompson, Agent Morrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. We're conducting recovery of operational materials related to Agent Williams's assignment. The specialized military marksmanship training programs charge €69,000 per course, teaching impossible shot techniques to government agencies and high-level security contractors across America. Agent Morrison, Thompson replied carefully, can you tell me anything about what Agent Williams was actually doing here? Morrison glanced at his partner before responding. What I can tell you is that Agent Williams was conducting a long-term assessment of training effectiveness and operational readiness across multiple base functions. Her observations have provided valuable intelligence about current military capabilities. It was a diplomatic answer that revealed nothing, while confirming that Sabrina's mission had been far more comprehensive than simply observing range operations. The shooting demonstration this morning. Thompson continued. That wasn't part of her normal duties, was it? No, Morrison admitted. That was Agent Williams taking initiative to solve a training problem that was affecting mission readiness. She has a tendency to become personally invested in the success of the units she observes. The comment suggested that Sabrina's intervention with the Marines hadn't been cold professional analysis, but genuine concern for fellow warriors facing a challenge she was uniquely qualified to help them overcome. Davis approached the group. Having overheard the conversation, "Sir, can you tell us anything about Agent Williams's background? The capabilities she demonstrated today were extraordinary." Morrison studied Davis for a moment before responding. Agent Williams is what we call a multidisciplinary operative. Her skill set encompasses precision marksmanship, environmental assessment, intelligence gathering, and technical analysis. She's completed assignments in locations I cannot discuss, dealing with challenges I cannot describe. Next week features another undercover expert story that will shock you. Subscribe immediately or you'll miss it. The vague description only deepened the mystery surrounding the woman who had spent 18 months disguised as a base maintenance worker while conducting operations at the highest levels of military intelligence. Is she safe? Torres asked, the question reflecting a concern that had been growing since Sabrina's hurried departure. The way you extracted her, it seemed like there was some kind of threat. Morrison's expression darkened slightly. Agent Williams's cover was compromised this morning when she chose to intervene in your training exercise. Her continued presence on base was no longer viable from a security standpoint. Compromised how? Thompson pressed. There are foreign intelligence operatives who have been attempting to identify and track certain DIA assets, Morrison explained carefully. Agent Williams's demonstration of her capabilities may have provided confirmation of her identity to parties who have been searching for her. The revelation sent a chill through the group of Marines. Their morning training exercise had inadvertently exposed a deep cover intelligence operative to potential enemy action. Sir, Reeves said slowly, are you saying we put Agent Williams in danger by asking her to demonstrate her shooting skills? Agent Williams made her own decision to reveal her capabilities, Morrison replied. She weighed the operational risks against the benefit of ensuring your team's mission readiness. In her judgment, your success was worth the exposure. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his expression grim. However, the circumstances that led to this compromise require immediate corrective action. Gunnery Sergeant Reeves, you are hereby relieved of command of this unit. Effective immediately. A formal investigation will determine whether charges of insubordination and conduct unbecoming will be filed. Reeves's face went white as the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. Sir, you endangered a federal agent conducting classified operations through your refusal to follow proper protocols. Hayes continued coldly. Your career as a Marine instructor is over. You'll be transferred to administrative duties pending review. The Sergeant Major approached Torres and the other Marines. Staff Sergeant Torres, you and the other team members will undergo mandatory retraining on interaction protocols with civilian personnel. This incident demonstrates a fundamental failure in judgment that cannot be tolerated. Torres felt her own career prospects crumbling. Yes, Sergeant Major. Furthermore, Hayes announced, this base will implement immediate changes to prevent future security compromises. All training personnel will undergo enhanced briefing on operational security protocols. The Williams Protocol for Environmental Awareness training will become mandatory for all sniper teams across the Marine Corps. Williams felt compelled to ask the question that was haunting all of them. Will we ever see her again? Morrison was packing the last of the equipment boxes as he answered. Agent Williams has been reassigned to a new operational area. For security reasons, there will be no further contact with personnel from this base. The finality of the statement underscored the reality that Sabrina Williams, or whoever she really was, had passed through their lives like a ghost, leaving behind only the memory of an impossible shot and lessons that would influence their careers forever. As the DIA agents drove away with the remnants of Sabrina's 18-month cover operation, The Marines began their own journey back to the company area. But the conversation during the drive centered not on their successful qualification, but on the mystery woman whose brief intervention had changed everything. "Think about it," Davis said from the back of the transport vehicle. "She spent over a year watching us, learning our routines, understanding our capabilities. She probably knows more about this unit than our own command staff." Torres was still studying the wind-reading sketch Sabrina had drawn. This level of knowledge doesn't come from books or even advanced training. This comes from practical application under extreme conditions. Combat experience, Reeves agreed grimly. The kind of experience that civilians aren't supposed to have access to. Thompson, riding in the front passenger seat, had been thinking about the broader implications of the morning's events. "Gentlemen, what we witnessed today was a glimpse into capabilities that most people don't even know exist. Agent Williams represents a level of operational skill that's probably shared by very few individuals." The conversation was interrupted by Thompson's radio crackling to life with an urgent transmission from base headquarters. "Whiskey Jack units. This is base control. All personnel return to company area immediately for priority briefing. Deployment timeline has been accelerated. Acknowledge." Thompson keyed his microphone. "Base control Whiskey Jack units acknowledge. En route to company area. ETA 20 minutes. The unexpected change in deployment schedule added another layer of urgency to an already extraordinary day. Whatever mission the Force Recon team was preparing for had suddenly become more immediate. "Looks like we're going to find out how well Agent Williams's lessons work in the real world," Williams observed. Back at the company area, the Marines found the entire base buzzing with activity that suggested major operational changes were underway. Transport aircraft were being prepped, equipment was being loaded, and personnel were moving with the focused energy that preceded significant deployments. Captain Martinez, the company commander, met them at the vehicle as they arrived. "Gentlemen, I understand you had an interesting morning at the range." "Yes, sir," Reeves replied carefully. "All team members successfully qualified for deployment." "Outstanding. I also understand you had an encounter with federal agents that I'm not going to ask about because I don't have the clearance to hear the answers." The captain's comment confirmed that word of the morning's events had already reached higher levels of command, probably through channels that the Marines themselves weren't privy to. "What I can tell you," Martinez continued, "is that your deployment has been moved up by 72 hours. You'll be wheels up at 0400 tomorrow morning for initial staging in Germany. Then forward deployment to Syria within 48 hours. The accelerated timeline meant that everything they had learned about environmental wind reading would be tested in actual combat conditions almost immediately. The lessons Sabrina had taught them wouldn't remain theoretical. They would become survival skills." "Sir," Torres asked, "does the accelerated deployment have anything to do with this morning's events?" Martinez considered the question carefully before responding. "What I can tell you is that certain intelligence regarding enemy sniper capabilities has been updated, requiring immediate response from precision marksman teams with advanced environmental assessment skills." The phrasing was diplomatic, but the implication was clear. Intelligence that Sabrina had gathered during her 18-month assignment had contributed to mission planning that was now affecting their deployment. "Captain," Davis ventured, "will we receive any additional briefing about the environmental challenges we'll face in the operational area?" "Negative. The intelligence assessment indicates that your team now possesses the adaptive skills necessary to handle variable environmental conditions without additional specialized training." Again, the phrasing suggested that Sabrina's intervention had been noted, evaluated, and incorporated into mission planning at levels far above the company command structure. Over the following 12 hours, as the Marines prepared for deployment, they found themselves repeatedly applying principles Sabrina had demonstrated. Equipment selection, environmental assessment techniques, and approaches to precision shooting had all been influenced by their brief encounter with the mystery agent. Williams spent extra time studying topographical maps of their deployment area, looking for terrain features that would create the kind of complex wind patterns Sabrina had described in the mountains. Torres practiced environmental observation techniques that moved beyond simple flag reading to incorporate thermal analysis and three-dimensional airflow assessment. Davis and the other team members found themselves questioning their previous reliance on electronic equipment, not abandoning technology, but learning to use it as confirmation for observations rather than replacement for environmental awareness. At 0300 hours, as the Marines conducted final equipment checks before departure, Reeves gathered his team for a brief conversation. "Gentlemen, in 12 hours, we'll be in a combat zone where the skills we learned yesterday may literally mean the difference between life and death. Agent Williams took a significant personal risk to teach us something our previous training had missed." He paused, looking at each Marine individually. "I want you to remember that her sacrifice wasn't just about helping us qualify on a range. It was about ensuring we come home alive from whatever mission we're about to undertake." The weight of that responsibility settled over the team as they prepared to board the transport aircraft. Somewhere in the world, Sabrina Williams was probably preparing for her own mission, carrying skills and knowledge that existed at the very edge of human capability. At 0400 hours, the C-130 transport lifted off from the base, carrying 6 Force Recon Marines, whose lives had been changed by a brief encounter with a legend they would never fully understand. But as the aircraft climbed into the pre-dawn darkness, each Marine carried with them not just the technical knowledge Sabrina had shared, but the understanding that there were people in the world who operated at levels of skill and dedication that most could barely imagine. The impossible shot would become part of unit lore, talked about in whispers and wondered about for years to come. But the real legacy of that morning would be measured in missions accomplished, lives saved, and the understanding that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. 3 weeks later, in the mountains of Syria, Corporal Williams would make a shot that saved his entire team from an enemy sniper positioned in conditions that defied every ballistic computer prediction. He would make that shot using environmental reading techniques learned from a maintenance worker who turned out to be one of the most skilled operatives in the intelligence community. Staff Sergeant Torres would identify an enemy observation post hidden in thermal inversion patterns that electronic surveillance had missed, preventing an ambush that would have cost multiple American lives. And Gunnery Sergeant Reeves would find himself teaching other units the wind-reading techniques he had learned in a 5-minute demonstration from a woman whose true identity he would never know. But on that morning, as their transport aircraft disappeared into the darkness, carrying them toward an uncertain future, the Marines could only wonder about the mysterious Agent Williams and whatever mission she was preparing for in whatever corner of the world required her unique talents. The base below them gradually disappeared into the darkness, but somewhere in the administration buildings, a secure communication terminal was receiving an encrypted message marked with the highest classification levels. Operation Nightfall authorized. Primary target confirmed. Agent Williams proceeding to extraction point for new assignment. Previous cover compromised, but mission objectives achieved. Recommend commendation for exceptional performance under adverse conditions. The message disappeared into the classified communication system, leaving no trace of the woman who had spent 18 months disguised as a groundskeeper while conducting intelligence operations that would influence military policy for years to come. In a hotel room 200 kilometers away, Sabrina Williams was packing equipment that bore no resemblance to maintenance tools, precision rifles, electronic surveillance gear, communication equipment, and documents that would establish her next identity in her next assignment. A photograph on the dresser showed 6 Marines standing beside a target that had been hit by an impossible ricochet shot. She looked at the image for a moment, then placed it carefully in a secure box with other mementos from operations that officially never happened. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Target confirmed in Prague. Former partner Kane selling classified information to hostile intelligence services. Proceed with extreme caution. Authorization granted for terminal resolution if necessary. Sabrina studied the message, then deleted it according to security protocols. Marcus Kane had been her partner for 3 years, someone she had trusted with her life on multiple occasions. His betrayal made this assignment personal in ways that professional doctrine warned against. But personal or not, the mission was clear. Kane had information that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger American assets worldwide. The threat had to be neutralized. As she finished packing, Sabrina thought briefly about the Marines she had encountered at the mountain range. By now, they would be in their deployment area, applying lessons she had taught them in conditions she could only imagine. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she had been teaching them to read wind patterns and environmental conditions, she had been preparing for a mission that would take her into an entirely different kind of hostile environment, one where the enemy knew her face, her methods, and her capabilities. Her phone buzzed again with flight information and identity documents for her next cover. Lisa Martinez, art history professor, traveling to Prague for academic research. The legend was supported by months of preparation, false academic credentials, and a network of contacts who would confirm her story if questioned. But unlike the groundskeeper cover that had lasted 18 months, this identity was designed for a single mission with a clearly defined endpoint: find Kane, determine the scope of his betrayal, and eliminate the threat he represented to American intelligence operations. The window of her hotel room looked out over the city lights that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in that vast expanse of humanity, there were other operatives preparing for their own missions, facing their own impossible challenges, carrying their own burdens of responsibility for national security. And somewhere, 6 Marines were learning that the skills they had acquired from a mysterious maintenance worker were more valuable than they had ever imagined. The game of shadows continued, played by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged, and whose victories would never be celebrated outside the classified corridors where such things mattered. Sabrina turned away from the window, completed her packing, and prepared to disappear once again into the world of false identities and hidden missions that had been her life for longer than she cared to remember. The impossible shot had been just another day's work for someone whose entire existence was built around achieving the impossible, one mission at a time. But as she prepared to leave for Prague and the confrontation with her former partner, Sabrina carried with her the memory of 6 Marines who had reminded her why the shadows were worth walking, why the sacrifices were worth making, and why some legends needed to remain hidden to protect those who served in the light. 6 months later, a disgraced former gunnery sergeant, Marcus Reeves, sat in a windowless office at Marine Corps Logistics Base, processing supply requisitions, a far cry from training elite warriors. His instructor credentials had been permanently revoked, his advancement frozen, and his military reputation destroyed. Every night he remembered the impossible shot that had revealed his fundamental incompetence as a leader. Staff Sergeant Torres, demoted to sergeant, was teaching basic marksmanship to recruits. Her dreams of special operations assignments permanently ended. The other team members faced similar career setbacks, serving as cautionary examples throughout the Corps of what happened when Marines failed to show proper respect to those who had earned it. But the Williams Protocol had spread throughout military training establishments worldwide. Thousands of snipers now learned environmental awareness techniques that had been refined in shadows by someone they would never meet. Her legacy lived on in every impossible shot, made possible by understanding instead of technology. And in Prague, several unresolved questions remained. Who else was operating under deep cover in military installations? What was the true scope of Operation Blackout? How many foreign agents were actively hunting American operatives? Why had Marcus Kane betrayed his country? Where would Agent Williams surface next? And how many other legends walked among ordinary people protecting freedoms that most would never know were threatened? The story would end where it began, with a precise shot fired under impossible conditions by someone the world would never know existed. But this time, justice had been served, consequences had been paid, and the legend would continue in the skills of warriors who carried forward the wisdom of ghosts. Some legends never died. They just found new students to teach. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of aircraft engines carried other warriors toward their own destinies, armed with knowledge passed down from legends they would never meet, carrying forward traditions they would never fully understand. The wind patterns would keep flowing across mountains and valleys, invisible rivers of air that only the most skilled could read and predict. And somewhere, someone would need to make an impossible shot when everything else had failed. The training would continue, the missions would evolve, and the legends would pass their knowledge to the next generation. One impossible demonstration at a time. The story was ending, but the legend was just beginning. These stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new ad shows are waiting for you, and if you enjoy, please take a moment to subscribe to our eStory channel and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.